Welcome to the OC24 podcast, where we've taken some of the best talks and discussions from this year's 24-hour conference on global organised crime, which showcases some of the most interesting research into organised crime around the world. This episode is called Organised Crime in Latin America, What's New?
Thank you very much for coming and attending this conference and this panel in particular. We are going to talk today in this panel on organized crime in Latin America, what's new? And I think we have a very exciting lineup of presenters today. We're going to slightly amend the order. I'm going to tell you in a moment about that. But basically, I think the panel is going to revolve around things that are a little bit more already known. In Latin America, the main problem of organized crime is drug trafficking, in particular the cocaine trafficking. And some of the presentations are going to talk about how the drug trafficking has been changing in Latin America, adding new markets and routes to the traditional ones, and how criminal organizations have been exercising criminal governance in order to guarantee their domain on certain territories. We're going to talk as well about how other manifestations of organized crime have, such as human trafficking, illegal mining, environmental crimes, and cybercrime, have gained importance in Latin America. For that, we are going to start our presentation with, we're going to start our panel with Mariano Bartolomé, because he will have to leave for probably a few minutes, half an hour or so, to another meeting. So we are going to start with him. Mariano has a PhD. He's permanent professor of cybersecurity and public security at the Inter-American Defense College in Washington, USA. So Mariano, your 7 minutes.
Thank you so much. Before I start my presentation, Andrea, thank you for letting me be the first speaker. I really appreciate it, and I'll apologize of my lack of time. The title of my presentation is Cybercrime in Latin America in Times of COVID. I will share my presentation. Well, my name is Mariano Bartolomé, and I am currently working at the Inter-American Defense College as a permanent professor on cybersecurity and public security. Today, cybercrime is one of the main topics in the field of cybersecurity, and that's why we at the AADC are doing a research on its situation. In this regard, I would like to share with you some preliminary ideas. Yeah. First, the so-called cybercrime refers to the development of criminal activities in cyberspace. As we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic increased the number of internet users, as well as all kinds of activities in cyberspace. And obviously, different forms of cybercrime also increased. For example, the illegal trade on the dark web of vaccines and medicines against COVID-19. But more important were the new crimes that can only be done using computers, computer networks, or other forms of information and communication technologies. According to Interpol, due to COVID-19, there was a sharp increase worldwide in cases of so-called phishing, which is a deception to obtain personal data useful for carrying out fraud and other crimes. There was also a dramatic increase in malware attacks, especially ransomware, which block users' access to their computer system in exchange for a ransom payment. Latin America followed the trends observed globally, and in this context, we would like to share with you 5 points about our region. The first one Since the beginning of the pandemic COVID-19, cyber attacks by criminals have increased in the region. Attacks on business and companies are almost twice as high as those on personal users. Most of the cases, around 75%, happened in Brazil and Mexico, which can be explained by the size of their populations. The point number 2, today, the main form of cybercrime in Latin America is ransomware. As we said before, this is the crime in which the cybercriminal encrypts the information on a computer or device and demands a kind of ransom from the victim to unlock the computer and free their data. Here in the figure, you can see the position of Mexico in the place number 6 and Brazil in the place number 9 worldwide. Yeah. Our point number 3, in 2020, two Latin American countries ranked at the top 10 most ransomware attacked countries all over the world. Mexico, as I already said, in this place number 6, with more than 4 million attacks, and Brazil in place number 9, with almost 4 million attacks. The point number 4, for this year, 2021, between January and August, cyber attacks in Latin America increased around 24%, compared to the same period in 2020. Cyber attacks increased in all Latin American countries with only one exception, Costa Rica, and Brazil led the rise, followed by Mexico. And the point number 5, between January and August 2021, the use of phishing decreased. But several countries in the region are still among the most affected by this technique in the world. Brazil is in the first place with 15% of users who recorded an attack attempt. As a preliminary conclusion, in this phase of our research, cybercrime is a very important aspect of today's organized crime. It has grown in the last 2 years thanks to the pandemic COVID-19 and has a strong presence in Latin America. A strong and growing and rising presence in Latin America. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope this data is useful or of interest to you. Unfortunately, I have another obligation now and must leave the session, but I will try to be back quickly for Q&A before closing. Thank you, Andrea, and dear colleagues, for your attention.
Thank you, Mariano.
And I'm leaving the session right now.
Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping to the time.
Okay, thank you.
So I forgot to say, what we will do is have all the presentations now, and then open the floor or the screen, the Zoom up for questions, right? So our second presenter is Adriana Abdenur. She has a PhD from Princeton University. She's director of Plataforma Sampó, and she's senior policy fellow at the United Nations University Center for Policy Research. Adriana, all yours.
Thank you very much, Andrea. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel with so many friends and colleagues. I'll try to be very brief. My presentation is based on work that we have been carrying out at Plataforma Sampó, and specifically a report that's coming out later this month on the idea of environmental crime as organized crime. And while this may seem quite obvious to those of us who follow this issue and who think about the ongoing ecological crisis. For most of history, environmental crimes have really been treated, whether explicitly or not, as victimless. And what do we mean by victimless crimes? And this is a term that is sometimes used with reference to crimes that either involve only the perpetrator or that occur between consenting adults. And so understanding environmental crimes as victimless crimes, it presupposes that the environment is either infinite or that it's expendable, that these activities such as illegal deforestation, illegal mining, illegal logging, wildlife trafficking, just to name a few, that they have no real direct harm to human beings, or that the benefits of these crimes outweigh the costs, not just for the perpetrators, but for others who are involved, or society as a whole, really. And this is actually the kind of foundational logic behind the current and traditional development model that's been applied in, for instance, rainforest areas like the Amazon. This is also fed by a very common but outdated narrative that environmental crimes, for instance, in the Amazon, which is where we focus most of our research on environmental crimes, that it's a question of survival for low-income residents, including migrants, but also indigenous communities, Afro-descending communities like quilombolas here in Brazil. And so this is a very common narrative, is that in the absence of alternatives to income generation, that this is a necessary activity. And as I'll explain, this is partly true, but it's become much less true. And that's not where the focus should be, definitely when we think about law enforcement. What this presumption of environmental crimes as victimless has led to is these are very low priorities, not just for prosecutors, but also for law enforcement agencies and even international cooperation organizations. Two, that there has been a very compartmentalized approach in law enforcement with, for instance, prosecutors that specialize in environmental crimes, but that don't look necessarily at other types of criminal activity that are associated with and that also feed into or are fed by environmental crimes. And the overall result, of course, is very widespread impunity. In Brazil, for instance, it's a tiny percentage of environmental crimes that are actually persecuted. And more broadly, there is a culture of impunity that, of course, now is being fed into by the current government in Brazil. And so what we need, and I think it's underway now as more people and organizations understand the nature of the ecological crisis and the political underpinnings of this crisis, is a shift in understanding and the adoption of the lens of organized crime, not only for a better analytical understanding, but also recommendations for how law enforcement can improve in the responses to, but also prevention of these crimes. So the basic idea, of course, is that environmental crimes, they actually impact all of society, and that victims are victimized in many different ways. And the recent literature has shed light on many of these aspects. I'll just name a few. Obviously, with environmental degradation, we have not just deforestation, but extensive pollution and contamination, for instance, of rivers in the Amazon due to the use of mercury in gold mining. And this endangers food, water, energy security at many different levels. But we also know now that environmental crimes have a very heavy and climate footprint, not just because of the direct activities that they entail, for instance, the illegal logging, but also because the activities for which they open up room are among the most greenhouse gas emitting anywhere. So for instance, agriculture and beef raising, or soybean raising, which are the main sources of pressure on the Amazon rainforest. They're very, very big emitters of greenhouse gases. But of course, we also know that local communities, especially indigenous and Afro-descending communities, are subject to the creation of pockets of poverty, to forced displacement, to violence and crime. So we know when we look at patterns of environmental crimes that those areas present the highest levels of homicides, sexual exploitation, and they're also hubs of human trafficking. So for instance, in the Western Amazon in the state of Pará, where we do some of our field research, many of the municipalities in Pará that are the hotspots of illegal deforestation and now gold mining are also among the municipalities in Brazil with the highest levels of homicide. We know that some of these impacts reach way beyond the regions. There's research showing that decreased water supply here in Rio de Janeiro or in Sao Paulo are affected by deforestation and the decrease in the availability of water that comes from the Amazon. So we really have to look through the lens of organized crime and understand that, yes, at the front edge, we have individuals who resort to environmental crimes for income, but behind them, there are very sophisticated networks and very massive financing. So we have to understand the organizational dynamics, including, for instance, the division of labor, the use of new technologies, which is very sophisticated, and often the transnational ties that are established by these networks, as well as the flexibility that they are acquiring in terms of the different, the wide range of activities they participate in. And here in Brazil, what we're seeing now, and this is something that happens in Colombia now for a longer period, is closer ties between drug trafficking and environmental crimes. And this has been documented in different parts of the Amazon, whether through the use of the same drug trafficking routes or the airplanes that are used to take equipment or personnel. They're also used for drug trafficking and possible investment by the major criminal networks involved in drug trafficking, such as PCC based in São Paulo or Comando Vermelho based here in Rio de Janeiro, which have a series of alliances in the north and northeast of Brazil. So what are the repercussions for policy? 3 quick points. First, we need more research on the links between environmental crimes and other modalities of criminal activity. And I mentioned drug trafficking, but there are many others, and human trafficking, arms trafficking is another one. We also need law enforcement not to be so compartmentalized. Sorry, somebody's using a drill here. And finally, we need an international cooperation to take this into account, this multifaceted nature of environmental crimes, so that better responses are elaborated, but also more prevention is built at the local, national, but also international level. I'll stop here because someone is drilling next door into the wall, but I hope that you've been able to hear me, and I look forward to the questions and answer, although I apologize that I have to leave a little bit early to pick up my children at school. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. We were able to hear the whole thing except for just one small drilling there. So thank you very much. Next in our presentation is Marcos Alan Ferreira, who's an expert in criminal governance in Latin America. So your 7 minutes, Marcos. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea and Carolina, to organize this panel. Well, I will share some short notes about criminal and hybrid governance as a challenge to understand peace in Latin America in particular. No? And I'm currently developing a research with colleagues of the University of São Paulo, trying to understand how the governance, especially in urban areas, conducted both by formal actors like states and informal actors like organized crime, are central to understand our challenges to peace that's totally different when we compare to other parts of the world. And first, we begin with the assumptions that the criminal governance creates some blockage against peace formation in urban space of Latin America, which are approaching the scale of violence present in civil wars. This informal governance undermines the process of peace formation supported by civil society in two ways. First, maintaining levels of violence and also exploiting cultural and structural violence, but also pushing the state away from citizens. So, as I argue with some colleagues in recent publications in which we are developing this idea, of course, taking into account all the publications that deal with the rebel and criminal governance, is that it's not only important to understand how operates this kind of governance in urban areas of Latin America, but also how this kind of actors and the way that they work in the suburban areas in Latin America also creates some blockage to peace in particular. No, it's different if we compare other parts of the world like sub-Saharan Africa or even some parts of Asia, in which the blockage to peace is linked to ethnic conflict and so on. And we argue that it's central to understand how the criminal organizations also create some rules and governance and then impacting this peace in particular. So in a recent publication with a colleague from the University of Manchester, Professor Laura Richmond, and we developed this idea that where the state's monopoly of violence fails to provide the basic needs of citizens in terms of physical protection, human dignity, and social security, mostly in areas with high levels of structural violence, there's an increasing possibility of the emergence of areas that are not governed by the state. In such settings, criminal organizations have the capacity to create norms and rules, provide security services, and raise taxes in the territories under their control. And of course, this phenomenon in particular block other potential agency of local actors that can work to improve the situation of this space that suffer because the criminal violence and criminal governance in particular. When we talk about this concept that we think that apply perfectly to understand Latin America, it's important also to understand that this criminal governance has some steps. No? In general, the criminal organizations begin its way to govern, firstly, through internal governance, controlling and imposing norms for its own members. And then in the next step, you will see a governance for the criminal market in particular, and when we think about South America in particular, the management of the illicit business of cocaine trafficking is central. And in some areas, and this is particular strong in Brazil, Central America, Colombia also, we see a governance from the criminal organizations that not only control the illicit markets or for the internal operation of these organizations, but also control and impose norms for the people in general. And this brings another important discussion that I recently tried to develop with other two colleagues, and Marília Pimenta from FECAP and Marcel Soares from Federal Fluminense, that's the phenomenon of the hybrid governance. We argue that not only it's important to understand how operates the governance of the criminality in areas like we see controlled by PCC in São Paulo, the Primeiro Comando da Capital in São Paulo, or Comando Vermelho in Rio de Janeiro, or even Família do Norte that is not so strong as was in 2017, but it's still an important criminal organization in the Amazon area, especially in Manaus. But it's also important to understand that in some urban areas of Brazil and Central America in particular, we see a kind of hybrid governance in which we see the presence of different sources of authority in the same space, where violence, rules, and moral conduct are managed by both legal and illegal actors. So the people in these areas in particular try to manage their lives in a way in which we see authority of the state, and often the state in a repressive way, sometimes bringing violence also, and at the same time trying to follow the rules of the criminal organizations that operate in the areas. This that we are calling the hybrid governance. And the hybrid governance has the following variables that we see in Rio de Janeiro, but also in other parts of Latin America in particular. First, the coexisting parallel and political judicial systems. For example, an example is the debates of the Primeiro Comando da Capital in São Paulo, in which they make some informal trials for the people that not respect the rules, but at the same time, the state is also there. We see also variations on the competition for territorial and violence control, variations also on violence explosion. In general, when we have a competing criminal organizations in the same area, you see that this equilibrium will not exist, and the violence will increase in this particular place. Different types of legitimacy, and also different scales of illegal activities. So just to conclude, and this short note is to show that if you want to understand the organized crime in Latin America and South America also, it's central to reconceptualize some discussions. Like, for example, the state has really the monopoly of violence in Latin America in particular, or we see a kind of hybrid governance in which compete the state, or we see in the same space the state and the criminal organizations. How can we understand these classical concepts when we think about the contemporary Latin America in particular? So this is just some short ideas that I would like to share by now. And some of these ideas are in these two publications that I'm sharing in these last slides, okay? So many thanks, Andrea, and I conclude here.
Thank you, Marcos, for very interesting, and for keeping to the time as well, but very interesting presentation. So for the rest of you, for the audience, start thinking about your questions. We have another 2 presentations, and then we're going to open up the floor to questions and participation. So next is Concepción Anguita Olmedo. She's Professor of International Relations and Organized Crime and Terrorism at the Faculty of Political Science and Sociology of the Complutense University, and she's also a researcher at the Complutense's Institute of International Studies in the area of international security and international relations. Concepción.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I think you can hear me now?
Yes, perfectly well.
I'm sorry. Okay. I'm going to start now. My presentation is about the implication and impact of the relationship between organized crime and extractive mining, trafficking as a manifestation of violence against women. Well, criminal organizations carry out criminal activities such as illicit trafficking in drugs, arms, and people, among others, which have profound economic, political, and social consequences in those countries. In this sense, we can point out 3 characteristics of the action of organized crime: violence, corruption, and illegal extractive mining that generates related businesses such as trafficking. The use of violence by criminal groups is an instrument of power and control not only over the other criminal group, but also over the population and the state. This violence is related to the ends it pursues. The second characteristic is the high level of corruption. Organized crime groups need security in order to operate, with links are established between the state through public officials and transnational organization crime. This clientelistic relationship provides an umbrella of legality and even impunity for certain illegal activities carried out by criminal organizations in all spheres, and leads to the capture of the state, which generates greater insecurity, weak institutions, and the expansion of criminality. The third characteristic has to do with the extractive industries, mainly mining, where natural resources are alienated, especially through criminal organization. In this extractive context, legal and illegal capital merge, and a new region order is generated where it is difficult to distinguish the illicit from the licit. Illegal mining is not a problem of a single state, but affects extractive mining country with weak legislation. In this extractive dynamic, organized crime group see a very lucrative business, not only for the extraction itself, but also for the related business that are generated. One of the groups that suffer the violence of organized crime is the group of women, who not only occupy a marginal role, but also became victims. In the extractive industry, mainly men, gender inequalities are underlining, and women suffer discrimination and violence by criminal organizations that commodify and objectify women. Trafficking for sexual exploitation, as well as labor exploitation, is a common problem in all mining areas. Without doubt, there are bridges and corridors that supply the mining centers, especially those located in border areas with other states, or those that are difficult to access for the authorities. Not only adult women, but also minors are the target of organized crime trade, in what amounts to a serious violation of human rights. In conclusion, we can say that there is no doubt that there are links between organized crime and as an actor generator of violence and corruption. Extractive industries, mainly illegal and related businesses that are generated such as trafficking. I remain at your disposal to answer any question from you can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Concepción. You just gifted, you just gave 3 minutes to Carolina. Very lucky, Carolina. Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping the time. Carolina Sampó is our fifth and last presenter of today. She has a PhD in social sciences and a master's degree in international studies. She's a bachelor, so we're going from newest to oldest degree, a bachelor in political sciences. She does many more things, but she said, no, just say those little things and that's it. So I'm not going to say much more, but you Google her and you're going to find so much about her. Carolina, your 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And thank you to all my colleagues to be a part of this crazy initiative we are trying to share with you all there. Thank you so much. Okay, I will share my presentation. I will try to stick to the time. I will stick to the time. Let me just put all the screens so you can see the images. The idea of this presentation is to give you just a glance of what we are working with Valesca Troncoso. Actually, we finally got a paper accepted, but this is part of a bigger research project. So just please keep in mind, especially for those who are not from Latin America, that as Marcos mentioned before, cocaine is the most important drug in the region, and it's what criminal organizations use actually to do all their business, even though they have many other business they work with, but this is the most important one. Drug trafficking is what make criminal organizations in our region to develop. So bear in mind also that the growth of coca bush cultivation and also cocaine manufacture has been incredibly high for the last years, and this has have an impact in the democratization of cocaine. It's not only one organization or cartel that has the monopoly of the cocaine. There are many organizations. It's a big fragmentation business right now, except from the PCC, as Adriana mentioned before. And you also have to keep in mind that the pandemic I don't know, deepen the tendency that already existed, the use of the seas in order to traffic cocaine. So just to share with you, this is not the last, but the previous UN report on war drugs. And this is the map on the trafficking, on the cocaine trafficking. So as you can see, from Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia, which are the producing countries, we the global south, feed the global north, especially the US and Europe. And from Europe, we feed the Middle East, Asia, and new markets such as Australia, New Zealand, and As Andrea has mentioned before at the beginning of this chat, something have changed considering cocaine trafficking, especially the fact that in former years, the US was the most important market. But in the last few years, Europe has become more and more important to this business, especially not only because Europe is a destiny itself, but also because it's a door to the Middle East and to Asia. And these new markets are important because they make the product much more profitable and much more expensive. So criminal organizations are focusing more and more in taking the cocaine to Europe, sometimes through Africa, as you can see in this map, and then from there to Asia and the Middle East. And you have to bear in mind that most of the trafficking is done using containers. And these containers are only scanned in about 2% of all the containers in the world are scanned. So there are actually very few possibilities that container with cocaine is discovered if you don't have the data, if you don't have someone that tells you where to find the drug. It is important to understand that criminal organizations are rational actors. There are entrepreneurs, there are businessmen. So sometimes even for us, it seems to be a route that is not very profitable because you have to, I don't know, go down from Colombia to Buenos Aires, Montevideo, or whatever, and then you have to go to Africa and then to Europe, and from there to New Zealand or whatever. But these decisions also has to do with the idea of keep the risk low. It doesn't matter if the price of the trip is high, because that price is gonna be part of the price of the selling of the drug at the end. So to keep the market flowing, they will use the rise in the cost to fit the final price. With Valesca, we wrote Cocaine Trafficking from Non-Traditional Ports, examining the cases of Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay. Then you can, when it's published, it will be published in a few days, hopefully. And then you can check some of the things I was speaking about, the flow of cocaine in South America, the use of new port with less control that are not so close to the production areas and not so close to the traditional transit areas such as Brazil, Santos port, for example. The importance of this port is not only that they have less control, but also that they don't raise red flags in the arrival port. So it's easy for these containers. As you see, it's very difficult to take control of these incredible ships with so many containers on it. So if the container doesn't raise a red flag, it's pretty difficult for them to get scanned. And in ports with a lot of trade movement, it's much more difficult for law enforcement agencies to keep an eye on it. And it is important also to highlight that in the case of Uruguay and Argentina, the waterway that is used to take out drugs and other things, of course, from Paraguay and Bolivia, which are landlocked. So in order to finish this presentation, I think that the most important remarks are that criminal organizations always find a way to adapt. There is no one to control the sea. We only can manage what Anastasia called the doors, the door that takes out the drug and the doors that takes in the drug. And in the case of the Southern Commons, it's that it has become an important area of transit. We have not found so much drug yet, but there are a lot of seizures that showing that the trend may be that the Southern Cone is getting much important. So that's it. If you have any question, I will be here. Thank you so much.
Brilliant, excellent. Thank you so much. So with this, I think that we can open the floor to questions. I'm gonna, if you want to put the questions on the chat, let me see if I can. I don't think that I can enable people to actually ask questions, can I? No. So I'm gonna read out a question. And Awad, I see Awad El Karim, you've got your hand raised. If you want to write your question on the chat, I can read it out for you. So we have a question from Alex Duran from Bogota, Colombia. And anybody who wants to answer it can answer it, I think. How do criminal groups negotiate governance with other actors, such as formal and informal community organizations and local administrations? Does this change depending on the type of organized crime manifestation or illicit economies prevalent in the areas? Over to you, the experts.
Marcos, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you, Carolina.
Yeah.
Just make some short comments about that. Thanks, Alex Duran, for the question. I think that depends which criminal organization we are talking. No? Of course, that we can make some generalizations about some variables when we talk about criminal governance and hybrid governance, but the way and how they operate depends of the business and depend how hegemonic the group is in a particular area, or even if there is competition in a particular area in general. No, what we see, of course, is that some organizations are more developed, let's say, in the criminal governance and the gang rule to the civilians in general. For example, a case that I examined a lot in my career, that Primeiro Comando da Capital, for example, they operate not only the illicit business of cocaine trafficking, but also they have control of several Brazilian prisons, especially in states of Mato Grosso do Sul and São Paulo, and sometimes to operate some community organizations need the approval, let's say, to the criminal organization. But also, just to conclude, an important aspect that I noticed in my fieldworks on PCC, for example, is that the governance is different depending to the civilians in general and the enemies. No, they have different kind of norms and rules. And for example, in the trials, no, if something happens that a civilian did in a neighborhood that's controlled by PCC, they work in some way in general and not with harsh punishments. But when we are talking about a criminal that's another criminal organization, then the punishment will be more strong, even with that and so on. Also, even depending who is the actor that this criminal governance is operating, and will change the way of a criminal organization will deal with a problem in a particular territory.
Brilliant, thank you. Anybody else who would like to add anything?
Yeah, just a few things, just a few words. Thank you, Andrea. I don't think that manifestation of organized crime or the kind of illicit economy we are talking about shall change the way criminal governance is taking place. And I was thinking, because it's a very interesting question what Alex posed, because it may happen that they negotiate in some point. I don't know. For example, I was thinking on different cases, but I'm actually convinced that they don't negotiate with civil society. They work in order to gain legitimacy through cooperation, through services and good provision, but they may be able to negotiate with some local actors, local political actors. I am thinking on small areas with, I don't know, with political figures that may need criminal organizations to gather some territorial points together and maybe have some exchange of votes there. They may have some political capital available in order to deal and to negotiate with political figures, with local political figures. I mean, I don't think that this is the case when you go broader, when you go to a state or province level or even to national level. So that's it. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So we have 3 questions lined up. The first one is Regine Schönenberg from the Free University of Berlin. And this is a question for Adriana. Did you find examples of the relationship between local gangs, militias, and incoming organized crime groups like the PCC or the Comando Vermelho? Then we will have Rona Rizquez and Isabel Eaton. Adriana.
I'm just not clear on the question. Is she referring to environmental crimes or is she talking about Rio de Janeiro?
That's, for example, in Acre.
Well, in our research, what we have seen is 2 things. First, that most of the groups that we might call militia in the region, they are formed by farmers as, ostensibly as self-defense forces to protect land. But in fact, what they end up doing is, carrying out or helping to carry out the invasions of land, especially illegal invasions of indigenous lands and conservation units. And for this, of course, they are armed. It's almost a rule in that part of the country. The other type of armed group that we see forming almost ad hoc is around mining camps, because they tend to concentrate so much machinery and personnel. Often they are also implemented in very remote areas of the Amazon, especially in states where the rivers are not navigable. And so they also either are armed or they take along armed security guards who then become a little bit more organized. And so the category of militia is a little bit difficult to delineate within that particular setting. But what we see in the current scenario is that there seems to be an influx of arms, especially from domestic sources, but along the border also of international trafficking of arms that fuel the constitution of these groups. To what extent are they linked to the PCC and the Comando Vermelho and their respective allies? This is still very incipient. There are small cases and documentation of this, but it tends to be focused on urban areas or area near the large cities within the Amazon, because as Marcos mentioned, these groups dominate the carcerary system, and they tend to be urban. So we need to understand both the urban and rural dynamics, and then look at the linkages. But I would say not exaggerate, because in Brazil, it does seem to be very incipient, whereas in Colombia, those ties have been documented for decades. Thank you.
Thank you, excellent. So before you go off to pick up your kids, there's another one for you. Rona Rizquez asks, have you identified any important and powerful roles of the Venezuelan non-state armed groups in the ecosystem of Latin American criminal gangs?
Is that for me as well?
I would think so, because it's ecosystems, but perhaps not.
No, I don't think so. I think
okay,
Georgie, I'm sorry, I cannot see the name, is referring to Latin American criminal gangs as a whole.
Oh, the ecosystem of criminal gangs. Okay,
I think so. I'm not sure about that. Maybe if
you're free to go.
Clarified.
Yes, right. If anybody who wants to answer them.
I don't know, Marcos, maybe?
No, I don't know how. I'm
really don't know.
About the Venezuelan setting, I don't know. I prefer not to comment because I don't know about Venezuela. Sorry.
Neither do I. I'm so sorry. We really don't know about Venezuela.
Andrea, I can say something.
Yes, go on. Yes, go ahead. Sure.
Okay, so what we have observed is that within Venezuelan territory, new criminal networks have arisen, or old ones have been reinforced due to gold mining, which is rampant. And some of these networks do seem to have either the implicit or explicit backing of the Venezuelan state. And there are also reports of these groups crossing borders or acting as part of transnational networks, especially in Brazil, in the case of Brazil, around Roraima, which borders Venezuela, and where we have vast evidence that illegal mining is taking place, especially in the Yanomami indigenous land. Now, most of the perpetrators there are Brazilian, but there are reports of Venezuelans crossing over. And I believe there are also reports of Venezuelan networks operating on Colombian soil, but these are not, sometimes the anti-migration discourse, conflates this with these criminal gangs. And from what I know, they operate very independently of the migratory networks of people that are fleeing from the situation in Venezuela. So I wanted to add that should not be conflated.
Brilliant, thank you. So you see, it was Adriana after all. So we have another question from Isabel Eaton. She asks, what's flying under the radar when it comes to organized environmental crime in Latin America right now? Put otherwise, what's not getting attention that we should be looking at more closely? This is again, I think, for you, Adriana.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Yeah. What's flying under the radar? What should be paying more attention and we are not looking very closely at?
Okay, I'll be very quick because I need to go. I apologize. I need to go pick up my kids from school. But when it comes to environmental crimes, I think one area, and we are researching this at Sampó, we have forthcoming publications, is financial crimes that are associated with illegal mining and other environmental crimes. And of course, there's a literature on the laundering of not just money and gold, but also other types of assets that come from environmental crimes. And these are very serious, not only because they present massive tax evasion, but also because they're closely tied to the legal trade in forest commodities, especially to the European Union, the Great Britain, United States, and a few Asian markets. And so untangling what's legal from what's illegal is a task for international cooperation, definitely. And this requires a lot more investigation. So with that, I have to leave you, but thank you so much to the organizers for such a thought-provoking discussion.
Thank you for your brilliant presentation and answers.
Ciao todos.
Bye-bye. I think that this is not necessarily the same Isabel, another Isabel asking Carolina. Great to see these new routes pointed out. How flexible do you think these routes are? Once a delivery got seized, do you think they directly switch between routes or are not able to?
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you so much for the question, Isabel. Actually, you know, like criminal organizations have like a portfolio, like different ways they can take the drugs out of the continent. It's not only maritime routes, it's not only taking into account one port or the other. As I mentioned, with Valesca, we study Buenos Aires, Montevideo, and San Antonio, but we are also aware that there is a lot of other ports, especially in Chile, that may be taken into account. It's very easy actually for criminal organizations to switch the routes. Of course, they give priority to the ones that they know that actually work. They take into account that they may be able to lose around 20% of the cargo. They take that into account before doing the shipment. They know this is part of the cargo they can lose during the shipment. But as I said, it's very easy for them, for example, to take the drug out of the region through Santos. But during the last 2 or 3 years, Santos has become much more conscious on the drug, and control has been improved. So this has forced criminal organizations to search for other routes, other ports to take the drug out. It doesn't mean that they don't use that port anymore. They use it, but they have another alternative. So once a new route is discovered, they don't stop using it. Maybe they stop using it for a couple of months or something like that, or they can distract the attention from one route to the other. And that's something that appears a lot in our research too. People that says that it rings a bell that Chile seems to be the third port from which cocaine is coming to Europe. So sometimes these shipments are not so big, so it is weird, you know. And sometimes we think that it is possible that someone gives law enforcement agency the data of the Chilean port, knowing that a bigger shipment will be leaving through, I don't know, Ecuador or Colombia, or maybe even Peru. So of course, routes are not static. They keep changing the whole time, but they are not thrown away because one seizure. They are very flexible. And as I said at the beginning, they have like a portfolio of options. They choose from that and they mix them.
Excellent, thank you. So we have another question again from Isabel Eaton. There's maybe environmental, and we've already said goodbye to Adriana, but perhaps the rest of you can point to answers here. She says that there was an excellent recent media article, probably The Guardian, about the challenges of ensuring supply chain legitimacy, fraud, and criminal networks that are benefiting from illegally purchased cattle entering the meat supply chain in Brazil, thereby aggravating severe environmental degradation. Any comments about the extent of the problem in and outside Brazil? Do you know anything about the illegally purchased cattle and how that enters into the meat supply chain?
I don't know what a cattle is.
Cattle, vacas, de ganado.
Ah, okay. No, I don't know.
This is not my
No,
issue in particular.
not.
What I just to make a very short comment on this, no, that's while because the current Brazilian government has several issues regarding the environmental degradation, this issue is coming to the media by now. But this is a problem that is not from today. No, the use by illegal cattle to send meat to Europe and North America in particular is an old issue, and of course because the loose and political public policies regarding environment, of course this problem is getting worse now, but not a new one. Just a short comment.
Brilliant, thank you. So we have another one from Philip Mirolovic, asks, according to Carolina, according to your research, how big is the part of cocaine trafficking from Latin America that is done by gangs from the Balkans?
I cannot tell you about percentage. I cannot tell you that this is static, actually. I think that this have changed in the last few years, actually. And if we take, and Marcos can broaden on this, I got deep and I think so. But I think that, I don't know, a couple of years ago, maybe the gangs from the Balkans, also other kind of traditional type mafias, were very important in taking off the shipments. I mean, local criminal organization used to take the drug up to the port, and then the traditional mafia will take it from there. But I think that especially PCC has grown so much that is actually taking care of that shipment too. So it has been like movement, in this 2 or 3 years. We have changed from the PCC taking the drug to the port, and right now PCC is taking the drug to Europe or to Africa directly. So I think that maybe these traditional type mafias has loosened a little bit of the market here. It doesn't mean they have lost the business, but maybe they have to share some. But as we have said at the beginning, there is such a flood of cocaine in South America right now. There is a lot, can be share marketing.
Andrea, if I can just a short comment on this, and many thanks, Philip, for the question. I heard several times in interviews with the people that works in Brazilian federal police and so on, that this connection with the Serbian mafia especially is like a connection because the business, no? PCC control the logistic part in the South America, and then make some agreement with the mafias, especially in the Balkans and also in Italy, to bring this cocaine to Europe in particular. And also we have some public investigations in Brazil, that's open documents, everyone can find this, in which some people that's probably linked to Serbian mafia was arrested in Brazil doing this kind of business with Primeiro Comando da Capital. So I think this is like a agreement between criminal gangs that we can see clearly, in which a criminal organization in South America control the logistics here, and then they deliver the cocaine to continue this logistics to Serbian mafia or in Drangheta and all.
Thank you so much. So we have another 10 minutes. We have to finish sharply at 1:15, whatever your time is, whatever you are. I'm going to now allow you panelists to ask each other questions if you have questions. Perhaps I'm going to take the liberty to ask a question myself. Something that perhaps was not talked about is the links between these organized crime groups and terrorism and more ideologically driven groups. What is there complementarity? Is there increasingly also competition? How do you see? I know it's a super general question. Take whatever part of the world you want. What do you think is the relationship and the similarities and differences between the way terrorism and organized crime act internationally or transnationally, rather?
Maybe I can answer the question. Sorry, by my English, I don't practice a lot. I'm going to try to establish the relationship between organization crime and terrorism. Now, it's a relationship that they need mutually. They need mutually because organization crime has the root, las rutas, the roots, and have the mercado negro. Sorry, I can understand. I can explain in
black
English.
Market.
El black market. Okay. And the terrorism have the money and need, for example, arms, or for example, other instrument to the act of terror. So it's a relationship now that they need mutually, but it's different, the organized crime and the terrorism. The terrorism have only an objective, ideological objective, and the organized crime has an economic objective. For example, in Africa, there are a lot of relationships between terrorism and organized crime, but only because they need mutually, not because organized crime like to reach the power or to change the politics, and the terrorism. Yes, they can change the political, the structure and the government. And I think it's only for a relationship we need, no, we need mutually only. I think it's this. Sorry, because I don't practice my English a long time ago, and I forget a lot the word. Thank you.
It's perfectly understandable, everything you said. Carolina, Marcos.
Carolina, ¿quieres comentar algo sobre eso?
No, go ahead. And then
I think that, especially in the 2000s, there are a lot of discussions about the links between terrorist organizations and the criminal organizations, especially in tri-border, no? But few evidence were found about this, especially the links between Hezbollah and cocaine trafficking. But what it's important is, when necessary, some criminal organizations are able to use terrorist tactics to maintain control. This was perfectly clear, for example, in May 2006, when Primeiro Comando da Capital interrupted everything in São Paulo, burning buses and killing policemen and so on. So I don't think that, at least in my research in general, clear links between this criminal organization and the terrorists, but they, if necessary, to use terrorist tactics to maintain control, they use, as PCC showed in 2006.
I agree actually with Marcos, but I would like also to highlight that even though we especially Argentina had terrorist attacks, terrorism is not the main problem of Latin America, but criminal organization is, organized crime is. I think that it's very important what Conchi highlight. In other parts of the world, in Europe, for example, in Africa, for example, it's pretty clear that terrorists uses organized crime in order to have the money, to get the money, and with the money, they are able to persuade their political goals. But in the case of Latin America, as Marcos pointed out also, even though we have pointed out the tree border area for a long time now, we haven't found actual proof of the bound with Hezbollah and the fact that the terrorist attack have been, financing through the tree border area. So, but I like what Marcos said, because it happened not only in Brazil in 2006 with PCC, but also in Central America with the Maras. Sometimes this criminal organization takes extreme measures, and these measures are acts of terror, even though they are not terrorists. But if they keep going that way, we may think they have changed their nature. Up to now, they haven't. So it's like sporadically they use these methods.
Well, thank you very much. I was also thinking, now we almost don't talk anymore about the civil war in Colombia, and the fact that there is starting from the more ideologically driven groups that have entered into organized crime. Andrés Paris Ramirez points out that there's a problem in terms of the definition of terrorism, because there isn't a worldwide accepted definition of terrorism. So, for example, he says that in Mexico's federal penal code, there are actions that can be labeled as terrorism that are not terrorism in other countries. We've got 3 minutes left. I would like to take these 3 minutes to thank everybody, to thank Carolina for organizing it and for inviting me to moderate it. Thank you to the organizers of this 24-hour organized crime seminar, conference, and to the presenters for super interesting presentations. To the audience, thank you very much for your questions and your participation. Thank you, everybody, and I hope that we can continue this conversation.
Thank you for listening to the OC24 podcast. For more talks, have a look at the podcast feed on whichever platform you use. There are loads more to listen to. Video versions of these talks are also available on the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime YouTube channel. If you would like to share these talks around, we ask that you use the hashtag OC24 and let us know what you think. The 24-hour conference on global organised crime is brought to you by the European Consortium of Political Research Standing Group on Organised Crime, the Centre for Information and Research on Organised Crime, the International Association for the Study of Organised Crime, and the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime. For more information, head over to oc24.globalinitiative.net. This has been the OC24 podcast from the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime. Thanks for listening.